John chapter 16, verses 20 through 24 and 33. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish or joy that a human being has been born into the world. So also, you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. In that day, you will ask nothing of me. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now, you have asked nothing in my name. Ask, and you will receive, that your joy may be full. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world.
Good morning. It's great to welcome all of you in the room and also all of you participating with us online. Also today, just so you know, I think we have all four of our campuses actually meeting together in spaces all over the place, which is the first, I think last week was the first time since March that we've been able to do that. So we're so excited about that. It's been a lot of work. We are grateful for our friends at Crosswinds Church in Leland for allowing us to share some space with them during this season. There's something really powerful, I think, about having Scripture read to us. You know, when you sit down and do your quiet time, and I assume everybody does, I know that's probably a stretch, but and you read things and you hear Jesus say things like, these are in red letters in my Bible, and he says, I will see you, and there will be a joy that cannot be taken away. That somehow when we are connected and we are in his view and under his protection and rule, there's a joy that cannot be taken away. And I think this is really, really important because we read things, and this season particularly is chaotic. I think we all know that. I think it's been hard in a lot of ways, a lot of stress. What I see as I listen to the news, even though I'm limiting my exposure to it exponentially every day, but I hear conversations, I sense a tremendous amount of fear among people who are older than myself, worried about what their country's gonna be like, worried about what's gonna happen in the generation behind me. I see just chronic fear and anxiety, or really it's anxiety and then it's fear. And what I've seen is every time someone seems to have a day or a season where they're not feeling so good, or it's gray or it's gloomy, it's like, is this it? Am I finally going off the cliff? Is my emotional and mental health finally caving into the world around us? And there's just all this sense of trepidation and anxiety about the condition that we live in. And we can't seem to find a foothold. We keep hoping that perhaps the economy will get better, COVID will go away, or this election will kind of do it for us, and we'll all get back to this place where we can find solid ground once again. And what I think we've got to learn, I think this to me is what's actually hopeful about this, is what we are learning is there is not a sufficient foundation for your hope that's ever going to be found in your circumstances. It's just not ever going to happen. And what you see in this promise that Jesus says, he says to us that when we just sort of let these words absorb, he says, I see you. You're going to lament and you're going to be sorrowful, but the world's going to rejoice because it's going to think that it has done something to me. And he's talking about his death, I think, in that. And then he says, but I'm going to see you and there's going to be a joy. I've spoken these things to you so that you will have joy. There's something about our relationship with him that provides us with an unshakable joy that our circumstances cannot threaten. I want you to hear that again, right? Because it's hard for us to believe. We just keep thinking if my car worked, or if my house was this, or if this was better, then we would be, you will find some sense of happiness, you'll find, but that's not where this depth, this unshakable thing lies. It lies in this relationship that we have been made for and created for, that is found in our relationship with Christ. And at the very end, he says this, Make no mistake about it, we're talking about the way of Jesus. He said, there is a way in which this world works. And you need to understand that in this world, you will have trouble. Things will not go the way they're supposed to go. But I want you to take heart because there's another way in which we've been created and called to live. Take heart. I have overcome the world. And we've been exploring these two ways. I think what a lot of us end up and what we're told all the time is that somehow there are ways in this world, and one way in this world is more godly than the other way in this world. And what I'm telling you and what I'm trying to lead us into is to understand that is not true. One way is not more godly. Both of them are ways of this world. There is a fundamentally different way in which you and I have been invited to live, in which we're looking specifically at the life and the teachings, the way Jesus interacts in this world, to explore his way in order to be compelled to give ourselves and to avail ourselves for him. We started this series in Isaiah chapter 61, and this 61 chapter verses 1 through 3. This is what Jesus read when he shows up in the synagogue to teach in his hometown. And he reads this passage, and then when he's done, he shuts the Bible or rolls up the scroll or drops the mic, or whatever you want to say. He finishes this and he says, what you've just heard is fulfilled in me. And you hear this language from Jesus all the time. What you have just heard, what you have just seen, what I say to you is fulfilling. I've come to give you life to the full. There's always this fulfilling thing that Jesus is talking about, and he says it here. So we're going to read this, and this is what has set up our series over the last few weeks, and we'll continue to do so. Chapter 61, verse 1. It says, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. This is what Jesus read. Because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from the darkness for the prisoners. Or the way that might be translated is relief from the darkness, the blind, or those whose perspective is darkened. It's this idea, and what we've been saying is there are these four categories. We've been looking at these four sort of issues that I think are really applicable for our culture today. The issue of poverty, he's assigned us to bring good news to the poor, to the broken. The idea of our brokenness. He binds up the brokenhearted, that there's a freedom that is proclaimed to those who live in bondage, and there's perspective brought to those who can't seem to find any. And we've been using these four things. And last week we spoke directly of poverty. What we said is this: people who walk in, there's ways in which this works, right? And in fact, I'll go ahead and put this up there. This is fundamentally governed, the way of the world is governed by some system of law. This is just for review, some system of law. It rests on evidence and it requires proof in order for anybody to act on anything else. You've got to prove yourself first before you can receive anything under this way of the law. You've got to do something first in order to receive something. This fundamentally sort of leads us to this driver to depend on some kind of system of exchange, some kind of system of demonstration, some kind of system that allows us to either legislate or interact with one another in some kind of way to make sure that our way of life is upheld, and it usually rests on the idea of fairness. It needs to be a win-win situation. It needs to be good for you and good for me. It needs to be able to be fair for everyone. And this is the system that we work in. And there's another way that we've been talking about. And last week we said that the way of Jesus, people who walk in the way of Jesus, they come in and poverty is met. Poverty is met with dignity because the promise of Hesed, if you were here last week, right? Poverty is met with dignity because of the promise of God's Hesed, His love, His faithful, His fierce, His coming at us and towards us love. It comes to us. And this morning, today, whenever you're watching this, we're going to talk about what it does for brokenness. What it does for brokenness. It's interesting. I have two daughters. Many of you know this. My oldest is 24. She'll be 25 next month. She's been married for a couple years. She's doing really well. Her and her husband, really proud of them. My youngest daughter is 19. She just caught me after the first service because I told them at the earlier service that my oldest daughter, she's doing really well. And then the younger, she's 19 in college. She said, the jury's still out. And she said, Dad, you just threw me under the bus. So the jury's actually back. She's really good. But both of them, I love them dearly. And I remember my oldest daughter, when she was born, we had, obviously we didn't know how to be parents. I'm not sure we still know that much. We're learning all the time. But I remember, all the things were happening. And one of the things that they did for her, she's always had this real tender side to her, really sweet. Her name's Maddie. And we were taking her to the doctors, and they were doing these tests, and it was like a kindergarten readiness or a readiness for school. I'm not sure exactly what it was. I think it was called the Dial 3 back in the day. Some of you may know what this is, some of you don't. I may butcher this, but this is what I remember about it. And it was a way in which they kind of test their capacity to make connections of words and concepts. That was the idea. And they would use like opposites and different things to kind of say, if we said something about this, would you know how to respond to that? And they would say things like this, if you go up, you need to come down, right? You start to see this, and if something is dirty, it needs to be, right? And then she went on, she took the test, and she actually got one wrong, and the one she got wrong was this. They said, if something is broken, and she said, you say you're sorry. And I looked at the doctor and said, you're not crying. I'm not crying, you're crying, right? We read this whole thing, because I'm looking at it, she got it wrong. The doctor couldn't believe it. It's like, if something's broken, you say you're sorry. And that's not how we think, right? If something is broken, it needs to be fixed. But if something is broken, someone needs to enter in and to feel that. And that's what we learned about Jesus, his compassion. He was moved in his guts. That's a phrase that they use often, that Jesus had compassion. He told stories that modeled people with compassion who were moved in their guts for another person. The promise in Isaiah is he binds up the brokenhearted. This doesn't mean he solves the problems. This doesn't mean he fixes what broke your heart. It means that he comes in and he enters in and he grabs a hold of your brokenness and he brings something to it that will allow healing to occur. And not only that, but there's something else that happens in there. You see, most of us, when we look at this, we see these things right here and we see them as sort of problems in our, do you know how hard it is to write sideways? We see these as problems. And what do we do with problems? We know what happens with problems. And what happens over here in this way of world, problems need solutions. And this is how most of our lives are spent. But there's something else about the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus isn't governed by the rule of law or the exchange of proof. It's governed by the authority of love. We learned this last week, right, when he said to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. And the second is like it, to love. He's talking about hesed. When John would write later in his letter, and he says that we love because he first loved us, it means that we receive something. It's not first we give and prove, it's that we trust and we receive. The economy of love operates on trust. Where there is no trust, there can be no authority in this. This is what sin erodes. It erodes our capacity to trust. It rests then not on systems to take care of things. Some of you have done this in your marriages. Some of you have done this in your friendships. If you do this, then I'll do that. If you cook, I'll clean. As long as you uphold your system, we're fine. But the way of life under the rule of love is always about a relationship. And it doesn't rest on fairness. It has a much bigger vision. He's not coming to make things fair. He's coming to call you to be full. He's brought you full life, free life, whole life. And therefore, the way this happens isn't by solving problems. It is bringing about his utterly powerful promise of redemption. People who walk in the way of Jesus, brokenness can be met with hope because of God's promise of redemption. Most of us think that if God were good, he wouldn't allow bad things to happen, but the actual goodness, the beauty of God is found in his capacity to take the bad things that have happened and turn them into unbelievable, unimaginable beauty if we are willing to let them go. What I want to show you this morning is how this promise works and what's at stake in this and how we actually learn how to live in this. Most of us live with things that have happened to us or that are happening to us or things that we have done or done to other people. And we keep trying to figure out ways to solve them. How do I make it up? How do I live in some way that actually makes this problem seem like it's something else instead of really embracing this promise that God has given us? How does he take something so undermining and so devastating and cause it to be something else? He binds up the brokenhearted. He brings them. The word bind is certainly the idea of bandage, but it also has this idea of governing in it. Let me tell you what I mean by that, or what I think the writer means by that. When he says that there's an authority or a governing to it, it means that something being bound. If you break a bone and it's bound up, it needs to be held in a position long enough for that healing to occur. And what happens is that, so like I had an injury, I tore my Achilles tendon, I had to remain in a boot, and I had the option, the boot was removable, I could take it on and off. But I had to leave it in the boot in order for the healing to occur. If I would have taken the boot off and just continued to use it, it would have never healed or it wouldn't have healed right. There's a submissiveness. There's a yielding, there's a surrendering to this binding that is required for this work to actually occur and to happen, for this promise to be received and fulfilled. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. I want to help you understand that. We've talked about the way of Jesus is an invitation to exchange one thing for another. The invitation that Jesus has given us is to bring your ashes and trade them for beauty, to bring your despair and trade them for a garment of praise, to bring this mourning, this deep sadness and trade it for this oil, this washing, this covering of joy. And the way of Jesus is governed by love. That's the ruling and operating authority over those of us who walk in the way of Jesus. And what we've said, and this is sort of Mike's definition, but the God-like love is a force that breathes worth and value into the soul of another. And everybody here, you need that, and you have the capacity to give that. I'll tell you how my life, right, how this is what I try to do. When I come to the Lord and whenever I'm doing my quiet time or in worship and we're singing together and we're singing songs, I'm just looking and I'm trying to see him and saying, Lord, I want to just receive the love that you have for me. I'm gonna let you breathe worth and value into my soul. And I'm gonna receive it. I'm not gonna try to justify why I don't deserve it or justify why I do deserve it. I'm just gonna receive it because you have given it and you have determined that because you made me, you've called me, you've created me, that you love me. I'm gonna just determine that and receive it. And then I'm free to actually give that to other people without demanding things in return. I'm free from this system that always keeps me wanting to make a win-win and make sure that I'm getting my way out of whatever I give to someone else. It's taken a long time to sort of learn this rhythm of this. I'm learning. I'm very fortunate to have some really beautiful people around me that remind me and model this and help me in this, my wife being one of them. But the goal in this is that we learn how to receive this and we learn how to give this because of what is at stake. When we look at the life of Jesus, and if you've been using our reading plan, it's online at portcity.church/compelled. It's on our social media, but we're reading through and just seeing the way that Jesus interacted in this world. And there are multiple places where I've been reading just kind of big, giant swatches of the Gospels over the last few weeks, both in preparation for this and also just to be reminded. And what I see is Jesus interacts with all kinds of people, lepers, where they're forbidden to touch me. If you read Leviticus 30 about the leper laws, it reads like Dr. Pimple Popper. It's like disgusting. And it's all these rules that govern lepers. And Jesus sees them, he would touch a leper, which is forbidden. He would touch the leper. Because what the old covenant meant was that if a clean person touched an unclean person, the clean person was now unclean. But what Jesus demonstrated, that when a clean person touches an unclean person, the unclean person gets clean. That's a whole different way to think about this. And he met with people who weren't supposed to be included, who weren't supposed to belong. They were tax collectors, and the Bible talks about sinners, right? Some of you use the word publicans, not Republicans, but publicans. And some of you are like, ooh, yeah, Republicans. They're publicans and sinners and tax collectors. And they would question him and say, Jesus, why are you hanging out with these people? Multiple times he would give an answer like this, Luke 5:21. Jesus answered them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but call sinners to repentance. You know what the beauty of that is? Anyone who doesn't think they're a sinner and needs of repentance doesn't get the invitation because they don't know they need it. One of the great ways that we can mask that in our culture is the capacity we have to control our circumstances and to make things happen so that it doesn't seem like we're as broken as we really are. Luke 19:10 has an exchange with Zacchaeus, and again, they say he's a tax collector. How can this man be hanging out with these guys? For the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost. When he had the chance to use his authority to leverage it, he says, I don't use my authority, my power. I don't use my influence the way the world uses it. Then he says this in Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. That's a novel idea for a lot of us right there. That how do we use our power? How to use your influence? How do you use what you've been given? Do you use it to keep getting more? To keep your position, or to use it to build others up and to make things available for other people? Jesus said, I came to give my life a ransom for many. Another thing that I noticed when Jesus was, he just fed the 5,000 in the book of John. And everybody saw this, and the word gets out that Jesus took like this little boy's lunch, and he fed all these people. And everybody's like, Jesus, this is your time. You need to be our king. And what he said was that Jesus, knowing they intended to make him a king, to sort of raise him up and say, you're the man, it says he withdrew to a mountain by himself to pray. Right, just when he had sort of the world at his fingertips and he could make things happen, and he had the popularity, and he had he was the rising star, and he knew they were trying to sort of push him in this place, he pulled away. There's another place, this is where I want to look today, where there's this sort of tension of what we could do and then this other way of life. This is found in Matthew chapter 16. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there, Matthew chapter 16. This is an exchange of his disciple, Simon Peter, and Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 16, he had just finished kind of letting the Pharisees have it pretty good because they were accusing him of some stuff. And then Peter comes to him, or they have this exchange where Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. He says, that's right, Simon, son of Bar-Jonah, you're no longer going to be called Simon, but you're going to be called Petros, or rock, because it is on this foundation that I'm going to build my church, and the gates of Hades, the gates of hell, shall not prevail against it. This is a pretty powerful moment for Peter. He's like, yes, this is awesome. What an exciting thing. And then this is what occurs in the very next verse, verse 21 of that same chapter. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Now, I don't think anyone heard him say on the third day be raised. I think they were just fixated on the fact that he's going and he's going to let these people who he's had so much tension with kill him. And so verse 22, Peter gets an idea. He says, hey, took him aside and he began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord. Dying is a bad idea. Now, that's my paraphrase, but you can imagine how this conversation went. Jesus, you're talking about dying. Do you realize that you're at the top of your game? This is a really, really bad idea. Do you know what you could do with the popularity you have? Do you know how much good you could do? Far be it from you that this should happen. This should never happen to you. Have you ever felt like that? You ever felt like that? So something's happened in your life and you can't for the life of you figure out why God would allow this to happen to you? Because in your mind and your plans and the way that you're calculating things, he would get so much glory if he would just do this. That was my story. I was a good Christian kid growing up. I was a youth group leader all the way through high school and college, and I graduated college really early. I went to school and finished as early as I could, and I was a volunteer youth pastor at the church that I attended. My wife and I had just gotten married. I was young, and we were volunteer youth ministers at the church. We got just volunteer and working with the youth group, and I was the youngest deacon elected in the church. And you know what everybody told me? Oh, Mike, you are doing what the Lord has called you to do. You are fulfilling his purposes for your life. And every time I would open up my Bible and try to do my quiet time in the morning, the only thing I heard from God is, you are not doing what I am asking you to do. You know why? Let me tell you what's really going on in my life. Everybody saw this young guy who who graduated college and gotten married and volunteering in the youth group, being a deacon in the church, good character, all the things that you would, here's what's going on in my life. You know why I got out of college fast? Not because I was smart, because I wanted to be rich, and I figured the earlier I got started, the faster I'd be rich. Has anyone else felt like that, or just me? Like the quicker start you get, the faster I'm going to be where I want to be. And all these other things were a means to an end. And what God was asking me, what Jesus was asking me is, are you willing to trust me for my purpose? Or are you going to keep trying to figure out how you think I can best be glorified in your life? And let me tell you, that was a wrestling match. God, you don't understand. Do you know how much glory you will get from my life if you just make me like this? I had it all figured out. And it took something. It took me being willing to give something, to offer something, to release something, to surrender something. To let go of the things that I was trying to build for myself, or the idols that I was going to hold on to and trust and depend on. He took those away. Actually, he invited me to give them up. And the reason I say this is because this is exactly the picture that's happening. Looking at Jesus going, we can't fathom how dying is a good idea. We can't fathom that you not getting in this position or getting this thing or this thing, how we can't fathom how that is a bad idea. And so he comes to Jesus and he tells him this, and then Jesus in verse 23 turns to Peter and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Talk about a sharp response. "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. You are pulling me away from the things that I've been entrusted and called and put here to do. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." You're not setting your eyes on the things of God, but on the things of man. You see, what I think we have to learn how to do, and this is, as I think about this, these are all problems that need to be solved. But when you understand these are actually conditions of a world that is fallen, you begin to see it a little bit differently. Do we need to work to solve and bring systematic change to poverty and brokenness in life? Of course we do. Those are all true things. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying anything, but I'm saying there's a way for us to see this that's differently. That we focus on the dignity. We focus on hope. And the hope isn't in the fact that we're going to solve the problem. The hope is in something else. For your brokenness, for my brokenness, for the brokenness of the world, we've got to be able to enter in with hope because of God's promise of redemption. You know what redemption is? The way I define redemption is this. Redemption is really simple. Redemption is requires us to believe and to trust and to hold on to his stubborn promise to use everything. God's stubborn promise that he uses everything. He wastes nothing. The mistake that you made last week and you feel like it's finally pushed you over the edge, he has a way and a will and a resolve to cause that. What man has intended for evil, God intends or uses for good. He doesn't shy away from brokenness. He enters into it. So we don't have to be afraid of it. They couldn't fathom how his death could be helpful because they couldn't understand how essential it was. Because the frame of reference is, how is this going to work out based on what I can see? And what happens is we begin to live our lives in sort of a solution or a mindset. We focus on the problems and it's always driven by problems. But when you focus on a redemption mindset, when you begin to understand the way of Jesus is the way of redemption, you start focusing on purpose. And this isn't just a trite little, how's God gonna use this in the future? That's not what how's this gonna work out? It's not about our calculations. It's about something far more pervasive than that. There's so many intimate details of my life about his redemptive call in my life that have nothing to do with what I ended up doing as a vocation. It's much more internal than that and much more intimate than that. When we sort of get stuck in systems, right? What we think is when we sort of get stuck in problem-solving mode, we're always thinking about systems and we're paralyzed by fairness and we can't do the kind of things that Jesus is calling us to do because we can't figure out how to break in. This is why we talk about it relationally. We say this a lot around here, but this is why we don't stand on issues, we walk with people. Because these aren't issues, there are people in this. This is where we do our work, is in the relational side, to enter in, to bring hope to people who are struggling in these areas, perhaps yourself as well. What's fascinating is what Jesus goes on to say, and this is what he says, and this is what I think is important for us. This is how you embrace or start to endeavor in the way of redemption. After Jesus sort of sliced Peter up, you're setting your minds, Satan, you're setting your minds on things of God. You're not setting yourself on things of God, but on things of man. Then Jesus told his disciples, verse 24, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. For whoever's going to hold on so tightly to your will and your way, it will eventually be plucked from your hand. Whoever loses his life for my sake, what is the promise? They'll find it. Do you know what the problem with us reading that and believing that is we don't understand it. We can't see how it's going to work the way we think it is, and so our minds immediately start calculating. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and he forfeits his soul? For what shall a man give in return for his soul? What kind of exchange is worth that? The way of Jesus is not a strategy for solving problems. Are there helpful solutions? Of course there are. Does our walk with the Lord help us? And of course it does. But that's not what it starts. That's not what it's first about. It's first about a way of life under his rule as our King. And as citizens of the United States of America, most of us are, we live in the Western world. We are very familiar with democracy and government by the people and all those concepts. We're not very familiar with kingship. And what we're talking about here is us learning how to live in allegiance to one, to someone who exercises rule and reign over every domain of our lives. That's what Jesus is inviting us into. He came to call the sinners to repent. He came to call those who do not walk in his way to turn from that way and to embrace another way, to trust him for forgiveness of our sins. Right? People who walk in the way of Jesus, we meet brokenness with hope, including our own brokenness. What I want you to understand, I want you to kind of test yourself on this, is that the greater your level of anxiety and frustration with what's happening around you, I want, instead of trying, when you say, I feel so anxious, I feel so afraid, I feel so bothered by all these things, and you start to say, what would be the solution to those things? And you have probably an answer. If this happened, or this happened, or this happened, or this happened, then you would feel better about the world, and your anxiety would diminish, or your fear would diminish, or whatever it is would diminish. What I want to submit to you is that the greater your frustration and anxiety that you feel, it actually reveals your need for Jesus. And I don't say that flippantly. That's not like a trite little spiritual answer. I want to talk about this and kind of show you what I'm talking about. Because what Jesus invites us to do is to exchange, to deny ourselves. To say, here's what Mike wants to do. God, here's how you could get so much glory from my life, and exchange it for yours. God, you don't understand how much this is or what you're going to do if I do this. And you try to hold on to these things or grab these things or make these things, and you instead say, I'm offering this to you. It is complete surrender. For some of you, it's your ambition. Ambition is not bad, but when ambition becomes your source and you're trying to get God to use your ambition to get him glory, you got to be willing to say, here it is. For some of you, it's your money. For some of you, it's your relationships. For some of you, it's a lot of things that you keep sort of trying to get God to do. And because you can't figure it out, it bothers you. Here's the one thing that I've learned, and this is kind of, just free for y'all, for us. But one thing I've learned in my life, and I try to operate like this all the time, is that just because I can't figure out how God is going to do something, has no bearing on his ability to do it. Most of us are paralyzed because we can't figure out how God's going to pull something off. And so we stop and we hesitate and we calculate. That's not the deal. It's not a democracy. He's a king. He's a king. For some of you, you've never made that connection, right? When I talk about the kingdom, you're like, oh, it's a cool vision for it, but you're not in it because you've never bowed your knee to him as your king. You've never trusted him for salvation. So here's what I want you to know. There are a lot of people who are watching online, and perhaps some of you in this room, who you don't believe in God or you don't believe in Jesus, you don't trust him. And you know what I found when I talk to people who don't believe in God or don't believe in Jesus or don't trust Jesus? It's not that they're like, they usually have good reasons why they don't. They usually have some reasons why. Well, let me tell you what my experience is. Let me tell you what I've heard. Let me tell you what I've seen. Let me tell you this. One thing I want to tell you, if you're here and you have never trusted Jesus, what I would invite you, look, our mission is not to try to convince you we're right and you're wrong. That's not at all. Our mission is to reach people and help them walk with God. Our posture is to extend our hand to you. How can we help? And what I would say is if you have questions or concerns, or maybe you're a little bit skeptical or even cynical, we would be honored to have conversations with you to help you perhaps take your first steps with Christ, or at least your first steps towards him. We have a program that we call Starting Point. It's exactly what it is. It's a starting point. It's a place for you to come and ask all the questions that you didn't think you were allowed to ask in church. We welcome them. And we have people and ways for you to connect. If you're online, you can fill out the Connect card. We would love to get you connected with some of our great folks who would be more than willing and honored to help, to help. One of the great things that I love about our church is that people come in here in all kinds of different conditions and philosophies and ideas. And they come in here and one thing they'll say is, I came in here and the walls didn't fall down. I thought if I went to the church, the walls would fall in on me because God's like going to condemn me or judge me. Or I came in here and no one condemned me or no one judged me or no one ran away from me or people treated me like I was human. I think it's a huge, huge, beautiful part of who we are as a church. And so we want to make sure you understand that our posture is to be helpful, to invite you in to what it is that Jesus has done for you in the life that he wants. But it requires surrender. Let him deny himself. Let me deny myself and take up my cross and follow him. Trust him. Yield to him. For some of you, you're here and you surrendered at one time, like you trusted Jesus at one time. You asked to receive Jesus, or maybe you're like me. When I was growing up, every time I would say a bad word or have a bad thought, I'm like, Jesus, can you come into my life again? Because I'm sure there's no as a Christian if I did that thing. Some of you have asked Jesus in your heart so many times over and over because every time you do something, you think he left you. And he doesn't. What he's inviting you into is not to figure out how to balance the system. He's trying to teach us how to live in a relationship that actually trusts what he says and who he is. To respond to him as your king. To bring everything to him in this way. And so maybe you're here and you've sort of just got distracted by all the things and the demands of this world. Maybe it's the fact that your life works well and you're super comfortable and you're actually ticked that all these other things are threatening your comfort. Maybe that's creating a little bit of inside of you. Or maybe it's just the worries and the fears. Maybe you've forgotten that there's a king who has said, hey, I got a promise for you. And if you're here and you're like walking with the Lord and things are going well and you're bearing fruit, we have a way for you to respond to. You could help us help all the other folks who aren't. We help each other do this. And what we need, if you're willing to do that, to let us know so we can help you get connected with people who are in need and just work together to continue to reach people and help them walk with God. Because where this begins, redemption begins with the things that you're willing to surrender. That's that simple. And so we're going to sing and close with this song. The song is All Hail King Jesus. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I sing this song, like, all hail King Jesus, I just think about this. He's kind of mild and he's kind of cool. Maybe he's got a sheep in his hand and all hail King Jesus. When I begin to think about the force in which he came to redeem and to reconcile and to do for me, to yield his power to destroy those who crucified him in order to absorb it for them. and to conquer death and to come back and to say, I've come to bring you life. I came to do this as a demonstration of my love for you, your worth in this. And then when I hear John 16:33, I hear a little bit differently. This is a conquering king who says to you, hey, things might get tough. They might be tougher. He almost like pulls up, he leans up, and he says, hey, lean in here a little bit more, lean in real carefully. Things are hard, it's chaotic, it's stressful. Things aren't going like they ought to go. Maybe it's in your personal world, maybe it's just the culture around you. You know what he says? In this world, you will have trouble. Then he says, hey, right here, take heart. Do you hear what he's saying? Take heart, grab hold. Do not be afraid to deny, to bring it to him. Because he says, I have overcome the world. You know what that does for me? It's like I'll go wherever he's going. I'll go wherever he's going. Now, that's exactly what he's inviting you into. But it begins, right, with your willingness to surrender. What are you holding on to? What are you holding on to that's keeping you from allegiance to Jesus Christ? Father, I ask that as we declare this, that we would get a picture, we would see you, perhaps in a way that we haven't before or we haven't in a long time. That when you tell us this world's gonna have trouble, right, you're not trying to make us feel better about ourselves. But rather, you're calling our attention, you're calling our allegiance to your promise that you have made with all authority that is given under heaven and on earth, to call us to take heart because you've already done what needs to be done. Father, let that vision compel us to bring our brokenness, our fears, our hesitations, and to surrender them, to bow our knee to our King as we declare, all hail King Jesus. And it is in his name that we pray.